What happens when your faith questions lead you down a YouTube rabbit hole? On this episode of Compass Finding Spirituality in the Everyday, we sit down with Reverend Matt Patrick, an Oklahoma pastor, theologian, and creator of the Connexionalist YouTube channel. And we dig into how digital spaces are shaping our spiritual journeys. We're going to hear how Matt's passion for deep theological conversations, honest exploration of doubt, and Methodist perspectives come to life online, and what it really means to connect faith to everyday living in a hyper-connected world. This episode scratches a couple itches for me, as of course I love exploring the ways in which faith is an always-on presence in our lives, but I also love learning about some of the innovative ways that the church moves into the world. Now, for a lot of people, talking about faith on YouTube probably doesn't sound that innovative anymore, but as Matt is going to point out, it's not a widely utilized pursuit in my slice of the faithosphere, so to speak. Cool. So stick with us, discover how YouTube communities and thoughtful dialogue and a spirit of curiosity are helping people encounter faith in church in fresh ways. And of course, if you find conversations like this valuable, well then like, subscribe, leave a comment or a review on your podcast listening platform of choice. Thanks. Let's meet Reverend Matt Patrick. Matt, we're going to get talking outreach and theology all in the course of talking about YouTube. As you've been growing your channel on YouTube, I'm wondering if there are other rabbit holes or channels that you seem to get sidetracked by. Like, what are some of your favorite things to just research out on YouTube these days?
YouTube is an infinite source of folly and wisdom at the same time. I honestly, my main passion is actually not theology, which is probably going to be surprising. American history has always been one of my deepest research passions. I went to school for theology for 7 years, so obviously I do like it. I have a YouTube channel about it, but I would never start a YouTube channel about American history because I'm not credentialed, in the same way to talk about it. I don't speak with any kind of I don't think authority. Not that that matters on YouTube, apparently,
Right.
to a lot of people. But American history, vlogging through history is one I love a lot. Chris Mowry at Vlogging Through History. He does a lot of reaction content. He's a historian. He does a lot of his original content. He's kind of an expert in the American Civil War, which is one of my main areas of study. Is in American history is that period. So I love theology, but then I'm also a nerd. So video games, card games, that kind of stuff. That's what I'm on YouTube a lot for. Yeah.
Do you go down the rabbit hole of watching live stream on video games?
It's funny. Yes, at a certain point in my life, yes, I was very into like Twitch and live streams and stuff like that. And I would watch a lot of streaming stuff. Now that I'm not single, I find that my fiance and I watch a lot of content together, right? And Twitch is something I watched when I was single, and it was like in the background a lot. And I'm usually not like, you get what I'm saying? So now I've had like a dynamic shift in my life. So I don't watch it as much as I
and now
do.
you have a companion.
It was a companion, and now I have a companion. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. So yeah, I still watch live streams from time to time. And I like speed running. I don't know if you know what that is. Video games, people playing video games as fast as possible. It's like a fun, very nerdy niche of the internet. That's pretty fascinating, actually, the deeper you dive into it. So,
well, your channel is the Connectionalist. What inspired your channel?
well, there's some pretty specific instances about that. I started following theology YouTube just a few months ago, actually. I didn't really engage that side of the internet. It was my job, right? So I'm not on YouTube to follow stuff for my work. And so I started watching some content, and there was some really good stuff out there. But what really spurred it on is conversations I was having with students. I'm a pastor at University United Methodist Church. And it's on the campus of the University of Tulsa, which is a Division I college. It's the only church on campus. And so a lot of people are like, oh, you're a campus minister. I'm like, no, I'm a pastor of a church. It's a full church. We have a campus. We have a Wesley Foundation across the street from us. But historically, the church has just been there since, in some ways, before the university. And so the church has been there a really, really long time. And I interact with a lot of students. And what I was really finding is they were getting their theological formation on YouTube. Almost all of them that
Ah,
I was talking to were getting theologically formed by YouTubers primarily, or people that had a YouTube presence. And the more I went down the rabbit hole, I realized there's not a ton of Methodist presence on YouTube. There's a ton of Catholic presence,
yes.
Presbyterians. I had a commenter the other day say that's because those two traditions emphasize academics and learning more than Methodism maybe does. And I thought that was an interesting thing. I'm not sure if I completely agree with, but I think that he may be onto something with that. Also, there's just a lot of Catholics. There's over 1 billion of them, right? So
Right.
that's just
Yeah.
that. But Presbyterians seem to be in some ways disproportionately represented on YouTube versus how many Presbyterians there are. And
Yeah.
so
That's
I was like, well,
interesting.
there's not a lot of Methodist presence, so I'm gonna start this and see where it goes. So
Yeah. All right. So when you were designing the channel, did you have an audience of your students in mind?
yeah, that was kind of the audience I started with in mind. It's really funny. I didn't like sit down and do like a plan and be like, oh man, I'm going to target this demographic. Now, I will
Hmm.
tell you, my analytics will tell you uh, over 90% of my viewers are men.
Okay.
And almost 90+% of them are under the age of 40,
Okay. Well,
which is a
that's
pretty
really
standard.
fascinating, isn't
Yeah,
it? Because if
yeah, it
you go
is.
through most churches, those are not the demographics that you see. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, churches these days are mostly older folks and mostly a majority women for
Hmm.
sure. I think the church has long understood that without the women, the church actually wouldn't operate
Hmm.
because the women do the majority of the work in most of the congregations I've ever served. And so it is very interesting to see that, and I'm sure that's almost an episode in and of itself of why that's happening. Yeah.
Was there a specific kind of spiritual hunger or a need that you were trying to address? Like when you were laying out the channel, did you have it in
Yeah.
mind to say, like, I definitely need to talk about this topic and this topic?
Yeah, what I have noticed, Ryan, and this is a larger trend that's starting to bear out in the data, and so I'm starting to say it more and more confidently. I firmly believe that the pendulum is shifting in American religion back towards traditional expressions of Christianity. That has been, I think, the case for a while. I think it's been the case since the pandemic. And I think it's mostly being driven by young people. And the reason I say that is because when I started at University Methodist, of course, it was under the pandemic, but even the year when students were coming back, we had a hard time getting students involved.
Hmm.
We would do all sorts of outreach stuff, and we just couldn't get students involved. But then this year, all of a sudden, there's just 20 students just coming every Sunday. I haven't even talked to them; they just
Hmm.
show up. That's not normal. That's not the norm that those of us who are millennials and older, the church we've been living in for the last 20 years, that's not a normative experience, and nothing had really changed. There wasn't a ton of change that had happened. And when I got to start talking to some of the students, what I found out is most of them were interested in traditional expressions of Christianity, Catholicism, Eastern Orthodox. They found my church, which is very high church Methodism. Of course, Methodism's a broad spectrum, right,
Hmm.
in terms of worship, but mine's very high church, very traditional, and that's what they were resonating with. And so when I set out to do the channel, I set out to kind of address some of the things that have been coming up in conversation, which is just like theological matters, right? I do believe this, Ryan. This is a critique on Methodism that I think is completely fair, and that is we have focused so much on doing Christianity and Methodism that we have forgotten how to articulate the faith,
Hmm.
and we don't articulate the faith as well as we could. And we are in an era where I actually think that's more important than ever because there are so many articulations accessible. And
Yeah.
so articulating Wesleyan Arminianism, right? Articulating that viewpoint is important. And what we say about God matters. And so what I set out on the channel, it was, I'm going to talk about that the hard theology stuff that isn't being addressed by our churches a lot.
Yeah. How much of that, in terms of kind of losing the language to express the
Yeah.
faith or being
Yeah.
unable to articulate, how much do you attribute that to kind of being a complexity of
Yeah.
of faith, because I can
Yeah.
remember
That's
you
a good.
like wanting to sit down for ordination interviews, for example, and
Yeah.
just wishing that I could just kind of say like, well, in Second Corinthians it says this, and then everybody would just kind of be like, yeah, that's what it
Of
says. All right,
course.
next
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's more to it than that. So as part of what you're trying to accomplish, like providing a lens for people to begin to identify how they might articulate some of these deeper topics, or
Yes, I specifically think the Wesleyan Arminian, and when I mean Arminian, for viewers who may not know, the kind of free will approach to the way God works in our salvation, right? That perspective is somewhat unique in Christianity, in terms of there's a lot of more the predestination side, the Calvinism side, even Catholicism is a form of predestination, um, but that Wesleyan Arminianism, I think, is such an important witness in the modern world. And Methodism is I always call it a thinking person's tradition. And I think Catholicism and Presbyterianism are thinking person's traditions as well, where we really emphasize the the proper articulation of God, or actually the rigorous academic trying to understand God and study who God is and understand that. And yeah, there is a complexity to it that I think sometimes we don't want to take on, because it is, like you said, I wish we could just say, well, we're just all going to love Jesus and do stuff, but it's
yeah,
just not that simple, right? Like what we say about God matters. And I think in this modern day, with Gen Z and below, they're like, well, why is your articulation of God better, or why should I believe your articulation of who God is versus what the Catholics are saying or the Eastern Orthodox Church is saying? And if we don't engage that discussion, um, it's really easy to lose it. I think a good example of this is communion. I think that this is I handled this on our channel. I think Methodism got very close in the late 20th century and the early 21st century to almost losing the the central place of communion in worship,
mm,
to the point where I was serving in churches where it almost felt like communion was a chore. It was like, oh yeah, it's this thing we got to do once a month. It takes a really long time. But the proper place of communion is actually the center of our worship, not preaching, not music. It's
yeah,
supposed to be the centerpiece. And we almost lost that in our tradition. And so I see a lot of younger ministers trying to like reclaim that piece. And so because it is so complex, I think sometimes we just would rather throw up our hands and be like, let's just serve God and love God. And I think that's great. But I also think about what we say about God matters, and we should engage that part of the faith as well.
mm, yeah. I love that idea of kind of reclaiming communion as the centerpiece, not just of like the worship service, but as the
Yeah.
centerpiece of kind of our rhythmic
Our
community, right?
existence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It really should be the centerpiece of our existence, like as
Mm,
Christians, right? Like it is the one thing that we have done from the very beginning that is basically untouched, and unaltered. I mean, it's been altered, obviously, in the way that
mm,
we do the liturgy, but for the most part, it's the rhythm of it is pretty much the same. And it is, we are spiritual presence people. And what I mean by that is we believe that the presence of the resurrected Christ is present in the communion elements, that it's not a symbol,
mm,
right? And a lot of American evangelicalism treats communion as symbolic, right? And so if we're truly going to be spiritual presence people, we should be having communion weekly in our churches at the minimum. And so that's kind of where I'm at on that. And I think it's a really good example of when theology gets watered down so much because it's complex, and we start to water it down to people too much, we end up losing key pieces of it. And so it's kind of a balancing act. Yeah.
mm, that's good. So, do you ever feel like you have to, what within the context of YouTube, do you feel like you have to water down some of what you're talking about in order to
Yeah.
be relatable to a particular audience, or maybe
Right.
more poignantly, to even like engage with an audience, to find an audience?
Yeah.
Because it is an open
To even
space,
find
right?
one.
You're
It,
certainly not going to academics. You're trying to create something that is accessible to anybody, right?
yeah. That's a really good question. It makes me think of Adam Hamilton. I think Adam Hamilton's one of his greatest gifts, among many that he has, is his ability to articulate complex theological ideas in a way that can be broadly understood by the general public. That is
Hmm.
not easy to do,
No.
and to do it without making errors consistently. It's very difficult to do that. And so I don't feel like on my channel I have to water down too much. I more just try to I either do my own original content or I take content and react and give commentary to it. And what I try to do is basically explain whatever the person is talking about or add to it in a way that I feel like anyone with an eighth grade education can probably understand. And I don't think that that's watering it down, because the essentials of the faith are like complex, like the Trinity, right? Trinity is a very complex idea, but it's simple in the sense that it's best understood as a mystery, right? That's a very simple thing. But if you really try to dive into the Trinity, it's a very complex thing. And so I try to both be communicative in a way that most people can understand, but also to respect my audience enough that they can understand difficult things as well.
Hmm.
It's that's a really good question. I'd have to think probably more on. Yeah.
But when bringing theology into public open spaces, I find that there are two kinds of topics that tend to
Yeah.
garner the most response. That there are those topics which touch people off in the negative aspect,
Yeah.
the argumentative side of
I did
things.
one of those yesterday.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I saw it. Hey, let's talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Table it for now, though. But then
Yeah.
there are the topics that touch people off because they find them valuable.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you've been at it long enough on YouTube to notice, are there specific topics that people are responding to because they find this theological viewpoint valuable?
Yeah. You know, it's really interesting. I think the YouTube algorithm likes controversy.
For sure. Yeah.
And of course it does, because
Yeah.
humans like controversy, right? People say, "Oh, the algorithm does this or the algorithm does that." No, no, no. Humans do that, right? And the
Yeah.
algorithm feeds what humans want, right? That's the fact that controversy does well on YouTube is not an algorithmic problem; it's a human problem, right?
Yeah.
So,
The algorithm is just responding to what we keep
the
asking
algorithm's
it for,
amoral.
right?
Yeah, the algorithm's amoral. It doesn't have morals. Humans, yeah, it's just feeding us what we want, which is controversy. I think. What I've noticed, and I've been surprised at, what does a lot of views and what people engage with, is apologetics, like
Yeah.
straight up. And I have been quoted before by people to say apologetics is mostly a waste of time. I have said that in my ministerial role, because I've always felt that faith is to be experienced, not argued into, right? And this comes to the point of Jesus, right? Jesus saying, "Come and see," right? Jesus doesn't spend a bunch of time making a like argument for God or for himself. He says, "Why don't you come and see what it is that I'm doing?" Right? It's this invitational experiential thing. But then I've come to kind of understand that apologetics is a way that some people come to faith. That's the way that they are able to get there. And so apologetics, specifically between Protestants and Catholics, the differences between Protestants and Catholics, those videos do wild numbers. And that for some reason I can do a commentary over the book of Exodus, and it's going to do 10% what a video about critiquing a Catholic thing that I've seen, or discussing the differences between Protestantism and Catholicism. That does a lot of numbers, because I think that young people are searching for, who am I? Am I Catholic? Am I going to be a Protestant? And they're researching that for themselves. And so what I'm trying to provide is, this is what a Methodist is, right? This is what we believe, at least what I believe, in my interpretation of the tradition. And I feel like that's the most helpful thing I can do for our tradition. So,
All right. So how would you describe then apologetics for maybe the uninitiated, or
yeah,
that's
apologetics is basically just arguments for God, right? Arguing
Okay.
for the existence of God, or arguing why Christianity is correct versus other faith traditions, right? And I think that there's a lot of value in that in the modern day. And I've actually seen a lot of people, I've had comments on my videos where people are like, "Hey, I've been researching. I'm going to go to a Methodist church on Sunday because I found this channel, and this is what I was looking for. This is how I felt about faith, but I couldn't find a home, and now I found it, right? Or I've had people
Hmm.
say that they found the channel and they're thinking about converting to Christianity, right? And so it's like, I have my parish ministry here, right? But the world is my parish, right? And I'll tell you, going back to that earlier question, somebody asked me, why did you want to do a YouTube channel when I first started it? And I meant to tell this story, Ryan, is that I didn't actually.
Hmm.
I have always felt that YouTube, it always felt watered down. It always felt like, even though I was a consumer of it, it was not a space I wanted to enter. It was almost like an undignified space, right? The dignified space is academic papers or the pulpit or the church, right? And the YouTube was kind of this open air preaching new style of the world being the parish. And then I thought of the story from John Wesley's life where he finally relents and decides to
Uh,
preach outside when he doesn't want to. And he
yeah,
wrote
he
in his
submits to
journal,
be more
he
yeah, you
submits to
were
be
saying
more
that. Yeah.
vile. And that's essentially why I started the channel. It was like, feel like I have to do this because that's where the fruit is.
Hmm.
So
Okay. All right. So as you're expanding, talking about
whatever it
apologetics
is.
to
Yeah.
people, yeah, you know the word that I'm
Yeah.
going for there. Um, are you to get a sense that you're trying to ease people of doubt, or
Mm.
I don't know, explain away doubt, or
Yeah.
do you feel like doubt has a place within the faith journey?
Doubt definitely has a place. I mean, if doubt is driving you to a deeper place in your faith, then it's healthy.
Mm.
If you're not dealing with your doubts, now this sounds more like a pastoral counseling session now. If you're not dealing with your doubts or you let your doubts tear you down, then it's not healthy, right? Doubt in and of itself is not a sin. It's how you respond to it. It's much like anger, right? Anger in and of itself is not a sin. What you do with anger is where it can be sinful. And so I don't try and explain away doubt. I try to explain how I understand the faith, and how I've gotten there, right? Like we always talk about like the historical arguments for Jesus, right? Like there's more historical evidence for the resurrection of Christ than almost any event at that time, more than any event of that time period. And we accept all those other events as historical facts, right? And so, but there's way more outside, like just having so many manuscripts of the New Testament from very, very close to the purported event itself. And we have events from Roman history that we treat as fact. And the closest manuscript we have to the event is like 800 years after the event. And we treat that as a thing that actually happened, right? So um, we have a very broad set of historical documents, of people who knew people who were there, right? And I feel like that's a very compelling case to a lot of people. And so there's always going to be doubt, right? Because we can't prove it. But I think it helps people to say, okay, if I'm an intellectual and I'm coming at this from an intellectual angle, this may be how I can first open my heart and open my mind to the possibility of faith is through those more historical arguments.
Hmm. So has this process of trying to first uncover the questions that other people might be asking and then offering a perspective on them, has that journey impacted your own faith in any way?
I would say that's actually the biggest impact it's had. I feel like my faith has been pretty static probably over the last 5 to 6 years. I've been very knee deep in ministry, doing stuff,
It's
getting
that doing
HVAC
part
units
again.
fixed,
Yeah.
that doing
Right.
part
So,
again. And
yeah.
what I've really discovered in and of myself is a renewed faith that I found in the tradition. The more I've studied in order to provide content, the more I've unlocked this rich, specifically Western Christian tradition that we come out of in Methodism, out of the Protestant Reformation, right? Is that the Protestant Reformation was never meant to start a new church. That wasn't the point. It was meant to reform the Roman Catholic Church, and then they got kicked out. And so they were like, well, I guess we're kicked out, so we have to start. So Luther, he didn't try and start his own church. That wasn't really the point. And so this Protestant tradition is really, to be a Protestant is to say this is what the church is kind of supposed to be, right? Without all of the extra stuff that we don't feel is essential as Protestants. And so my hope is that the church can come back together, of course, in the future, and reunify. But it has really informed my faith. Some of the Latin pieces of the faith from something I listen to quite a bit is Anima Christi, which is a Latin chant from the 11th century. That's something I found in the course of my study. So it really has enlivened my faith and allowed me to reach back in time to the tradition itself, and find where my place is in it as a Methodist, what our place is in it.
All right. Does it also help you articulate or formulate stances on some of the hot button topics? So you already alluded to, like, the video that you just released. That's probably a hot button topic.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm even afraid to say it. Why am I afraid to say it? Like, are we talking about the abortion video?
Yeah. I did a video on abortion, and I feel like I've never been afraid. In fact, before I posted the video, I asked myself, I'm 32, almost 33 now. I'm not 22 anymore. And there's a big difference. You start to really think things through more once your frontal lobe is fully developed, you start to really think things through because you've had some experience of things blowing up in your face, right? And so you're like, I don't want to say you become more risk averse, but you start to ask yourself more reflective questions before you do things. And I asked myself, is this going to be helpful to people? And did I do it correctly for something that's so difficult to talk about? And I had some hesitations, but I decided to post it anyway because I feel like we have to change the way we talk about things, right? We have to be willing to be a little bit more empathetic and gracious and compassionate in our disagreements with each other. And I felt that's what the video did. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and post it. But yeah, it reaching back in the tradition has helped me articulate some of my more progressive, I think some people would call it, some of my more progressive or modern viewpoints. It's helped me get better arguments for them. I've been better at articulating them because I'm having to defend them, right? And so I've really found myself actually changing the way I think on certain issues, not changing my position, but changing how I get there. And that's been probably one of the most valuable things for me personally in this journey.
And I've heard you articulate a sense of importance about the church or the community of faith. As you're putting your videos together, do you ever have the idea of this being a vehicle directly for people to kind of come in contact with the community of faith? Like, do you hope that somebody watches your video and is like, well, I think I want to go to church?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. Is how do I help people encounter the church? I did a YouTube short on this, a couple of weeks ago that got a lot of nasty comments. And the YouTube short was, "You can't be a solo Christian." And I spent 15 seconds basically saying, if you are singing worship songs in the car and listening to a sermon in the car and never going to church, that's not Christianity. You are out of communion actually with the church. And a lot of people did not like that. They did not like that. But I was like, but that's the historic position of the church, is that you have to be in communion with the body. And it is super important that we say that, I think, and not in a mean way, but just to say, if you are in that place, that's great. And I'm glad you're doing that. But you'll only grow if you have a community of faith that can grow around you, right? And that's basically what I said. I wasn't mean about it or anything like that. But it's been learning to find my voice in that, and to be willing to say some of those tougher pastoral things that I maybe need to say. But there were a lot of people who were like, "No, you can do that." And I'm like, but I feel like sometimes as pastors, in the endeavor to be pastoral, we don't say the thing that needs to be said. And I think that's a huge mistake for pastors sometimes. And it is that a lot of times in the endeavor, in the journey of trying to be pastoral, we don't say the thing that is true. And I have found in my ministry that when I choose to say the hard thing that is true, it always ends up better than avoiding it, right? To say the thing that needs to be said always ends up better. It's hard. It's super hard in that 5 minutes where you're having to have a tough conversation, but it is always better than the harder conversation that comes if you ignore those things. And so, yeah, I've been trying to steer people towards the church in that, and that's something I'm probably going to be doing more. as I do content is like, hey, here's a tutorial on how to find a church for you, right? Like that's a great video.
Hmm.
I might do at some point, like you got to decide what kind of worship, you want. If you can't go to church on Sundays, there are churches that do church not on Sunday, right? And so helping people make that first leap into walking into a church. Yeah, it's important.
Oh. Well, since you are kind of out in the agora, in the public place,
Yeah.
meeting people who are maybe faith curious but don't have that faith background, for somebody who is curious about Jesus or curious about Christianity but really unsure where to start, do you have some recommendations for where they might go? Should
I
they
mean, the
should they be
church,
scrolling YouTube? Go to church?
you know, I it would be ecclesiologically wrong for me to say start anywhere other than the church. The church, the church is
Cool.
the body of Christ in the world. And I understand if you're watching this, you may be like, but man, I had a really bad experience with church, or this happened or this happened. I totally get that. I 100% empathize with that. But there is no way ever that that your encounter with God is going to generally be more likely to be better at YouTube than it is inside the body of Christ. I just feel like you can have a bad experience. It's safer. YouTube's safer, right? You can watch it from the comfort of your home. There's less risk to you, but there's also less possibility of reward, in my opinion, of the real relationships that you can find. And here's what I would say: if you're a young person and you're like, man, I don't know where to go to church, or I'm looking for a church for the first time. I'm like kind of Christian, or I'm exploring Christianity. One of the best things you can do, I'm not kidding about this, find a little church in your town that has got like 30 people on Sunday morning and show up, and they're going to love you.
Hmm.
Most of the
Right.
time, they're going to be like, you're going to be in charge of that church in like 6 months,
Yeah.
because they're going to be like, this is awesome. We got this new young person. If you want to like have a big impact in a church and in a community of faith, you can go to a mega church. Yeah. And like you can go to all that and you can do that. But if you go to a small mainline Protestant church in your town and you plug in, you could basically you can have a much larger impact doing that, because those churches
True.
are looking for those people. That's who they want. And yes, you're going to have conflict. Yes, things are maybe not always going to go your way in that, but that's the church, right? And it's so much more rewarding to accomplish something in faith with the body than it is on your own, because that's how Christ intended for us to do it. So
That's funny. And if you're in those
it's
shoes,
true.
if you fit
Yeah,
the bill and you're in Nashville, Tennessee, reach out. I know just the church for you. So,
absolutely. I'm sure I was about to say Ryan's probably got a church for you to go to, because there's so many that are like that. That all it would take is a couple young families to
mhm.
transform that church, and you would actually. It's like I don't think sometimes people realize it's like you should never do things for selfish like ambition, right?
Hmm.
Um, like you don't want to be selfish in it, but it's like I always tell people like it's so funny like if you're just like a young family, you could probably end up going to some church, and if you really engage there, and the church kind of comes up, like they're probably going to name the church after you, right? Like because they're going to be so grateful
Yeah.
that you came and did that, and that's never going to happen in more of the kind of corporate megachurch environment, which
Right.
is really geared towards seeker sensitive kind of stuff. And so if you're really looking to dig your claws in and really make an impact, one of the best things you can do, yeah, is show up to a small to medium sized church and just dig your teeth in and really try and get involved. Yeah.
Well, I may be kind of asking for a friend on this, Matt. Wink, wink.
That's okay.
Uh, but I- no doubt, whenever you put yourself out there and express opinions, even with a heart of humility, people are going to come at you. At least
Yeah.
in like a YouTube space or any kind of social media space. So,
Yeah.
uh, when that happens, how do you kind of rebuff yourself or
Yeah.
keep it from taking you to a negative space?
Yeah, any of the people who say that it doesn't affect them are lying.
Mhm.
It does. You see that comment, it's really nasty. It's um I've had a couple people make comments where I'm like, that's actually a really good point. And I don't think if I was debating live with them that I could deal with that. Actually,
Yeah.
in the moment, that's actually a really good point. It makes me rethink things sometimes, which is actually a
Yeah.
good thing. There's fruit in that, actually.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, sometimes there's just mean comments, nasty comments. People will call you all sorts of things. You're not a Christian, you're a heretic, or whatever it is. Um, I think for me, um, my co-pastor Matt will tell you probably more than most people, I like a good fight. Um,
Hmm.
it's not a great trait, but I like a good. I'm part of that human condition that feeds that algorithm, right? The controversy doesn't bother me as probably as much as most, but it does. There are sometimes you get a nasty comment. So what I typically do is I'll type a response comment and then delete it
Yeah. Okay.
and never send it. I feel like my job as a pastor, since I am a presbyter, I'm an elder, my job is not to argue so much as it is. My first job is to be a pastor, and my second is
Hmm.
to argue my theological points. And so, if I'm ever not being pastoral in an argument, which I've done on the internet,
Hmm.
and I probably will do it again. That's probably not what God wants me to do. God wants me to approach it first as a pastor to the people who are engaging with my content. But from time to time, on a nasty comment, I will respond because it's also the pastoral thing to do to reply to stuff that is particularly egregious, to make a point that that's not okay,
Hmm.
or that that's not going to be acceptable in the community I'm trying to cultivate on the internet. So it's kind of a balance. What I try to do is discern the spirit in that moment, and I try and trust my first inclination on that as not my inclination, but as something God. If my first inclination is, or not first inclination, but if my first discernment of the spirit is you should delete this comment, I usually delete it because I can feel God telling me, the spirit. I can feel the spirit convicting me. That's not going to be helpful. But there are times where I feel completely convicted. No, I need to say something about this. But yeah, it I have I've learned to accept that when you put your ideas in public, um, you are opening yourself to criticism. And there are some videos I'm sure you've seen where I have been pretty critiquing of the video, right, that
Oh.
I'm watching or reacting to that I've kind of felt maybe bad about later. But then I
Hmm.
realized no, when ideas are in the public space, they are open to public critique. That is the nature of the beast. Now, you never critique people's character unless it is necessary, but you stay on the argument, not their character.
Yeah. Hmm.
But really vicious critiques on somebody's content can sometimes feel like you're critiquing their character,
Yeah.
and so I've had to deal with that some too. Yeah.
It's kind of that idea of play the ball, not the player.
Play the
Type
ball, not
deal.
the player, but sometimes you play the ball so hard that it feels like you're playing the player, right?
Knock
Where
the
it's
player
like
down.
I'm critiquing this person's argument. I'm torching it so much that it feels like I'm torching them
Yeah.
and their
Okay.
intellect. And like you got to be at that point that you feel like you got to start to draw back a little bit and take a breath and recenter yourself. So it's I'm still learning. I'm still very new. So
Hmm. Has there been a video that's come out for you yet where you thought, I don't know if this one's going to hit, and then surprisingly, it kind of takes off in a mini viral way?
um, there I'm trying to think. Some of my best ones. It's so funny. Many people know who Redeem Zoomer is. Huge theology YouTuber. He's like 22 years old. Most of the stuff I react to him does really well because he's just so popular.
Okay.
Um, I've been surprised at the Catholic Protestant stuff. When I when I feel like I rightly critique the Catholic Church on something, um, those videos do. I never think those videos are going to do well, and they always do well. And I really think it's because there's a lot of people right now. There's a lot of Gen Z people who are thinking about becoming Catholic, and who are growing up Protestant. I think that's a real thing that's happening because of the traditional aspects of it,
Hmm.
because it's rooted in tradition in a generation and in a world that feels so chaotic, that feels the news cycle every day is so wild. I think it's a generation that's looking at millennials and they're looking at Gen X and they're saying secularism since the year 2000 has failed to
Hmm.
produce fruit in this society, because there was this kind of secular turn at the turn of the century, and they're looking at the fruit of it and they're saying I'm not impressed with secularism's fruit, and they're looking at the most ancient traditions because they're like, man, these have lasted for they the rise and fall of nations, the rise and fall of empires, nothing has been able to stop these traditions. And so they're interested in them. So they're researching them. And so when I'm doing videos where I'm critiquing something that's in the Catholic Church or I'm talking about the differences, I think there's just a big appetite for that right now because there's a lot of young people identity searching their faith. So It's been really fascinating. I had one that got like to 2,000 views in a couple days, and I was like, I didn't think that video was good, but I guess people like
There it
that.
goes.
So that's how sermons are too. I think a sermon's bad, and then everybody's like, "Oh, that one really touched me," and then I'm like, I'll night before I'll be like, "Oh, this is a banger sermon I've got going here," and nobody says anything to me. Nobody ever says it's bad, but nobody says it's good either. So it's like, you just kind of learn to understand that the Holy Spirit's doing a lot more than you think,
For sure.
in that interaction. 100%.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I feel validated in that perspective as well.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
time I think, whoo, probably one of the best ever. And people are like, that was nice.
Yeah, it was nice. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks.
Good job today. Yeah.
The other times when you're like, oh, I feel like I just kind of verbally vomited for 20 minutes. People are like, I just needed to hear that so much this week. And you're like,
or my other.
Would you mind telling me what you heard?
Yeah. My other personal favorite, my son needs to hear that sermon, or my daughter needs to hear that. I'm like, but you do too, Yeah. Like we all need to hear it, including the person preaching it. So, yeah.
Well, Matt, thanks so much for spending this time with us. Where are people going to find you on YouTube?
The Connexionalist. So it's kind of spelled weird. It's like Wesley. You think of Connexionalism as Methodist, right? So it's like CONNEXION ALIST. Yeah, the Connexionalist. If you search anything close to that on YouTube, I've got enough videos up now. It generally comes up now. So that's the best place. Make sure you like and subscribe. That's what I always tell people. That's the best way. If you want to support Methodism on YouTube, which you should, because that's where Gen Z is getting introduced to denominations and their faith. That's where it's happening. If you want to support that as a Methodist, make sure you come like and subscribe. That's my plug. And I'd love to have anybody on the channel who wants to come and comment and be a part of the community. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for our Methodist friends listening, like we would really love to kind of overturn the algorithm there. So
yeah.
Support the good stuff.
That's right.
That brings us to the end of this episode. If you'd like to learn more or take a deeper dive into any of the topics that we've talked about, be sure to visit our website, umc.org/compass. There you'll find episode notes and, of course, a lot more episodes to explore, so don't miss out. In fact, a couple cool follow-ups for this episode would be number 149, Humor, Theology, and Deep Questions with Aaron Hicks Moon, or episode number 141, Community, Comedy, and Church Renovation, which explores several more stories of the church creatively meeting the world. We want to give a big thank you to the team at United Methodist Communications for making the Compass podcast possible. And if you haven't already, again, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you're listening or watching. It really helps other folks find us, and it lets us know what you're enjoying or what you'd like to hear more of in the future on Compass. Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you'll tune in next time as we keep finding spirituality in the everyday. Peace.